Good morning everyone. This is Kamikawa Kaelin. This time, I would like to share information from Keiko. Last time, I showed you the video of Japan's annexation of Korea that Koreans do not know, but it is additional information after that. Keiko said, the source of this video made by Dynamon Club is written by Professor Aline Ireland, 1926, of the University of Chicago. I think many are quoted from the book, New Korea. This book, New Korea, was published in 1926, but the following is mainly written in the excerpt. The New Korea by Professor Aline Ireland of University of Chicago, 1926. It is true that at the time Japan annexed Korea, in 1910, the actual conditions of life in the peninsula were extremely bad. This was not due, however, to any lack of inherent intelligence and ability in the Korean race, but to the stupidity and corruption which for 500 years had, almost continuously, characterized the government of the Korean dynasty, and to the existence during that period of a royal court which maintained throughout Korea a system of licensed cruelty and corruption. Such was the misrule under which the Koreans had suffered for generation after generation that all incentive to industry, thrift, and social progress had been destroyed, because none of the common people had been allowed to enjoy the fruits of their own efforts. Preface, page number, VV, where I have expressed my own opinion of Japanese administration in Korea. It has been derived from the consideration of what I saw in the country, what I have read about it in official and in unofficial publications, and from discussions with persons Japanese, Korean, and foreign who were living in the peninsula at the time of my visit. Preface, page number, VV, from 1910 to 1919 Japanese rule in Korea, though it accomplished much good for the people, bore the stamp of a military stiffness which aroused a great deal of resentment, hampered the progress of reform, and was largely responsible for the discontent which culminated in the proclamation of Korean independence by the leaders of the Korean nationalists on March 1, 1919. The new Korea of which I write is the Korea which has developed under the wise and sympathetic guidance of Governor-General Saito. At the time of my own visit to Korea, in 1922, the Governor-General had nearly completed 3 years of his tenure of office. The general consensus of opinion in Korea in 1922, except insofar as it reflected the feelings of the anti-Japanese extremists, was that Governor-General Saito had been animated by a sincere desire to rule Korea through a just and tolerant administration, that he had accomplished notable reforms, that in the matter of education he had ministered very generously to the cultural ambitions of the people, and that in regard to their political ambitions he had, whilst setting his face sternly against anything which could encourage the vain hope of independence, shown himself eager to foster local self-government, and to infuse into the personal relations of the Japanese and Koreans a spirit of friendliness and cooperation. Discussing Korean affairs with a good many people, Korean, Japanese, and foreign, official and non-official, I found almost unanimous agreement on 2 points. 1. That native sentiment had, in recent years, shown a continuing tendency to become less anti-Japanese. The other, that the remarkable increase in the country's prosperity had been accompanied by a striking improvement in the living conditions of the Korean people at large. Writing now, 4 years after the date of my visit, and having in mind the most recent accounts of the state of Korea, I can express my conviction that there has occurred a steady and accelerating improvement in the general conditions of the country, in the administrative organization and personnel, and in the temper of the intercourse between the Koreans and the Japanese. Chapter 3 Summary, p. 60–70. The following is the list of measures Governor-General Saito introduced upon his arrival in 1919. 1. Non-discrimination between Japanese and Korean officials. 2. Simplification of laws and regulations. 3. Prompt transaction of state business. 4. Decentralization policy. 5. Improvement in local organization. 6. Respect for native culture and customs. 7. Freedom of speech, meeting, and press. 8. Spread of education and development of industry. 9. Reorganization of the police system. 10. Enlargement of medical and sanitary agencies. 11. Guidance of the people. 12. Advancement of men of talent. 13. Friendly feeling between Japanese and Koreans. Chapter 3 Summary, p. 77. Professor Aline Ireland of University of Chicago was the leading expert on colonial administration in Asia. It was something to say. Keiko went on to say, what is amazing about the above excerpts is most Koreans showed the professor's various graphs and data, as he pushed in the format, simply, the economy such as infrastructure development and industry developed and contributed to modernization. It was exploited by Japanese rulers and some privileged classes. On the contrary, all Koreans in general are under Japanese rule. He continued to be exploited and abused by poor and unfair taxes. I teach that in Korea. This description of the Irish professor, the opinion of the professor as a result of talking with various people such as Korean ordinary people, foreigners, Japanese at that time is written. During the first 9 years, until 1910 to 1919, there was a nationalist backlash, despite the 1919 rebellion. Not only did Japan contribute to economic development, how were they trying to protect human rights and Korean culture and eliminate racial discrimination? In addition, the general public and foreigners at that time actually told the Governor-General of Korea, Saito, "It is written how you liked it." Asterisk, by the way, it is written here as a rebellion by nationalists. This is due to the opening of slavery by Japan. It was mainly the former privileged class called Rangoban, who became commoners and could no longer control slaves. In short, it is a government force called vested interests that becomes more troubled as it reforms. Today's Koreans have blamed this rebellion of the Joseon powers, who have plagued them for hundreds of years. It is too ignorant and pathetic to call it a national independence movement and a hero. If Japan is pulling here, isn't it just that Mr. Lee has returned to the state of Korea or has become like North Korea now? If reforms are made in any government, opposition will emerge. In reality, there is no such thing as a government that is supported by all the people. Best of all, the fact that the government was 100 times better than it was during the rule of its own people, this data proves. Japan used a large amount of Japanese tax because it was annexed. In the Tohoku region of Japan, famine occurred and some people died of hunger. I was spending taxes on the development of Korea. Furthermore, even after the war, he continued to pay huge amounts of money and lost a lot of money. Also, during World War II, 20 years after the book was written in the 1920s, there were 300,000 men volunteering for Japanese soldiers. Just by looking at this fact, Japan could not have been a bad guy for Koreans at that time. You can see that. Still, Koreans are suffering this time, but the Japan-Korea merger was threatened and forced to sign. Some people say, it's not the will of the people, so it's illegal. Because the people were slaves, they had no right to choose. Moreover, it was your husband who chose Japan over Russia. Even if Japan had an intention to invade before that, even if it is an unequal treaty in the end, both sides agreed to become the same country, so it is not illegal. Speaking of which, everyone shuts up. Rather, it is not allowed to have a name, and it is the common people of slaves who are called dung or dogs. He himself hoped that the annexation would eliminate the dictator's master. Do all Koreans now think that they are descendants of Mr. Lee, not the ordinary people of slavery? I want to say, apparently. I see, that's exactly right. I am convinced. In the following data from his book, State-Directed Development, 2004, Aline Ireland's The New Korea, 1926, was confirmed to be true. The average lifespan of the Koreans doubled from 23 years in 1910 to 45 years in 1945, and the population doubled from just over 12 million in 1910 to over 25 million in 1945 due to the institution of modern healthcare under the Japanese. Economic output in terms of agriculture, fishery, forestry and industry increased tenfold from 1910 to 1945. The economic development model the Japanese instituted played the crucial role in Korean economic development, a model that was maintained by the Koreans in the post-World War II era. Even if you look at the description, Professor Aline Ireland's opinion proves to be objective. In addition, this is a 1965 book by President Hoover, written 25 years after the war. This is an excerpt from Freedom Betrayed. Hoover talks about Korea he visited before in Section 3, The Case History of Korea, Introduction. It states as follows. The situation in Korea at that time hurt my heart. People were undernourished. There were few things to wear, and the houses and furniture were poor. Hygiene was poor and filth covered the entire country. There were only bad roads, few means of communication, and no educational facilities. There were few trees in the mountains. There was no order, as the bandits were slaughtered. In the 35 years under Japanese rule, Korean life has been revolutionized. Japan first brought in the most important order. Port facilities, railroads, telecommunications facilities, public facilities and private homes have also been improved. Hygiene has improved and better farming methods have been introduced for agriculture. A large fertilizer factory was built in northern Korea, resulting in people's food situation has reached a certain level. Japan planted trees on bald mountains, expanded education to the general public and raised the skills of the people. Dirty clothes gradually replaced with bright, clean ones. The state of Korea in the 19th century, Korean dynasty, Joseon-ri, it was very similar to the current state of North Korea. The majority of the population is hungry. It was enslaved by courts and bureaucrats called Rangoban, supported by the Qing dynasty China. When Japan defeated China in the Sino-Japanese War, 1894–95, courts and bureaucrats have lost their support. Soon South Korea fell into complete turmoil. To avoid Russia's invasion, South Korea chose to become part of Japan in 1910. This move was welcomed by the majority of Koreans. Both groups, who lost the privilege of enslaving people, were indignant. Is to say, how Koreans are saying now is unfounded, you can see that it is a delusional level drama. If you don't believe in such a joke, even the survival of the nation will be jeopardized. And if Koreans keep secretly thinking, there is no choice but to say, pathetic. Koreans lie. Chinese people were still better, is the word of an old lady who lived on the pre-war peninsula. The Japanese, and people all over the world, should never forget this word. Don't be fooled by Korean lies. That's all.